Hello students, this is Dr. Michael Schell. I am the instructor for this course, of Introduction to Philosophy, and I am so glad that you have decided to join in this adventure, and an adventure it will be. And so you're going to have an opportunity to explore some of the biggest questions in all of the world, things that you will have to decide for yourself in order to really have a life that you think is valuable, because there's some real fundamental questions that philosophy deals with. In fact, that brings up this guy behind me. This is the library at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. I'm not really there right now. I was there. They took this picture. One of the things that's great, besides just the beautiful architecture of this library, is that there are these wonderful statues of all the great thinkers in the Western tradition all around the library. And one of them is Socrates. Here he is. Socrates is the father of philosophy. Lived about 2,500 years ago in a place called Athens. And he went around asking people questions. And we'll learn that they didn't like that too much. And eventually the people of Athens sentenced him to death. He was executed because he asked too many questions. So we better be careful what we get ourselves into here in philosophy class. One of the things that he is famous for saying is that the unexamined life is not worth living. One of the things that philosophers do is examine everything. And many of the things in our lives we take for granted. We just grow up with assumptions, prejudices, biases, just things that we assume that's the way the world is. And Socrates says, in order for it to be a life worth living, we've got to examine everything. So that's what we're going to be doing. One of Socrates' students, named Plato, went on to become one of the great philosophers himself, gave us the story of the cave. And in the cave, these poor souls were chained to a wall all their lives. And they were chained in such a way that they could only look forward. They could not see each other. They could not communicate. And behind them, there was a constant fire that was kept burning. And the people who had them chained there would parade things behind them in front of the fire so that it cast a shadow on the wall in front of them. So all they ever knew were these shadows, and they assumed that that was real, that that's the way the world was, because that's all they ever experienced. Then one day, one of these guys escaped. He went up to the real world out of the cave and suddenly saw the sun and clouds and flowers and people and all manner of things. And then he realized that what he had experienced in the cave was just shadows of the real thing. And so he was so excited, he went back into the cave, went to talk to his friends, his prisoner mates, I guess, and they wouldn't believe him. They thought he was crazy. They just thought he was insane, because they had always understood things one way, and he was trying to say that he had seen the light and had come to tell them about what was real. I hope you'll experience that as we go through the philosophy class, that somewhere along the line, you're going to get a vision of something, you're going to come to understand something or question something in a way that you never have thought about before. And you want to try to explain it to other people, and they may not necessarily appreciate it, because these things can be very threatening to people, because it really questions a lot of their assumptions. Philosophy, for all it's been around for 2,500 years in the Western tradition, it really only asks three questions. What is true? What is good? And what is beautiful? That's it. Three questions. We've been kicking around for 2,500 years. Haven't got any solid, absolute answers yet. We're going to explore those together. Each of these separately in a different unit. We're going to be looking at these big questions in philosophy. What is true? What is good? And what is beautiful? And you're going to come to see that there are many, many, many philosophers all through history who have explored variations on these same themes. As you can see, again, I'm sort of obsessed with Lego right now. So here's my assortment of philosophers. And I hope by the end of the semester you could look at this picture and pick out a couple of them and know what it is that they taught about. Each philosopher has what we call a project. No one philosopher dealt with everything. You just couldn't. Your mind would blow up and you wouldn't live long enough. So each philosopher sort of specializes in a particular question that they're seeking satisfaction in answering, and we call that their project. And I like to think about philosophy as sort of like this subway here, in that in the center is truth. We're trying to come to understand what is true, ultimate truth for us and insight. And to get there, there's a variety of train routes, or this is like a subway system if you've been to Chicago or DC, somewhere that has a good subway system. So you can see that there's different ways to get into that circle of truth. You can go by way of ethics. What is right and wrong, and how do you know? Remember that question? What is good? Then connected to that is social philosophy. So what's good for me? What's good for society? What's good? How do you run a good government? Logic. How do you think critically? How do you analyze things for what they are? Then natural philosophy is science. All the sciences started in philosophy. Then once they gathered a certain amount of data, they broke away from philosophy to become a science. Psychology is like that. It sort of skirts along the edge. It used to be called philosophy of the mind. And then when it became a hard science, and by that I meant they collect data, and then they use that data to make assumptions and predictions, that's science. And one of your readings is going to do what's the difference between philosophy and science. Aesthetics is the study of what is beautiful. Then we have epistemology and ontology, which is a question of what is real and what is knowledge and how do you know. Those are all really big questions. Metaphysics is what is there besides the physical world, and religion, soul, truth. Lots of good questions that you can't measure. They're beyond the physical world. So this is sort of what the philosophical landscape looks like. Now, at this point, you might be getting kind of terrified because you're going to be dealing with philosophers from all over the world for 2,500 years, and they're going to be dealing with the biggest questions in the universe. And you may be thinking, wow, I'm in over my head. Now, there's where the good news comes in. I'm going to have some coffee. That's my other passion, besides Lego, is good coffee. So the good news is when you came into philosophy class, you already have all the tools that you need. I'm sure you've had the experience before of walking into a class. Maybe it was a foreign language class. Maybe it was a math course. Maybe you took anthropology. And walking in, you're like, I don't know anything. I don't know one thing about this subject. The good thing about philosophy is you've been doing this stuff for a long time. You haven't done it organized. You haven't done it reading and pondering, but you've been doing philosophy all your life. And you came into this class with all the tools you need. What we're going to try to do is focus on how to use those tools and what those tools can do. So if one of them is wonder. We're just born that way. Humans are just curious. If you've ever tried to go anywhere with a small child, and especially if you're in a hurry, it ain't going to work. They're curious. They see a bug. They see a flower. They look up at the sky and they wonder why the clouds are like that. And they ask why. And they are constantly observing the world around them and wondering. And then we kind of get squashed that out of ourselves when we become adults. We basically say, oh, stop asking so many questions. Philosophy requires that you ask the questions. Connected to that is the idea of doubt. That we can't assume that just because somebody said it, that it's right. just because we want to believe it, just because we've believed it our whole lives, doesn't mean it's true, valuable, good, beautiful. And so we have to hold back a little bit and explore whether or not those things are of value. Now, we're going to learn that's not skepticism. Skepticism is sort of a cheaty way to sound philosophical, but you're not. You just say, oh, you can't know anything. And it sounds sort of very intellectual. Oh, you can't know. But it's just sloppy. It means you don't want to work that hard to find the answers. So we're going to talk about that. Then connecting it to something you're passionate about. You're going to be watching movies. You're going to be doing some reading. You're going to be exploring. And so it will help if you keep in the back of your mind something that you care deeply about. Maybe it is healthcare. Maybe you're worried about the opioid epidemic. Maybe you're passionate about sports. Maybe you're passionate about childcare. I don't know what your interest is, but I guarantee you there's a way that philosophy connects with it. So if you keep that in the back of your mind and keep asking yourself, how does this apply to the things in my life that I find most valuable and passionate about, then I think you'll really see how philosophy connects with all that. And then lastly, logic. You have a sense of logic, right? You hear something and you think, that doesn't sound quite right. You can't really spell out why, but you have a good, it doesn't pass the smell test. We're going to talk about a little bit about logic. You need logic. So I teach an entire course on it. There's lots and lots of courses on logic because this is the way that we think and talk in philosophy. It's sort of the code language of philosophy is to use logic to get to conclusions. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. So we have really gone through a lot of stuff in this little bit of romp through the beginning of what philosophy is. I hope that gives you a kind of a lay of the land. The next part of this video, I'm going to go through the specifics of this course and walk through the details of what to expect and what the assignments look like. So thank you for joining me, and the rest of this we will talk about this course in particular.